Joe DiGenova now joins us. He is a U.S. attorney, former U.S. attorney from the District of Columbia, frequent guest on our program. Good to have you, Joe.
Good morning.
Here's my question. At what point do cases like this get determined to be an act of terrorism? Do you have to have a direct link to a terror group, or can an individual carry out something like this and have it be deemed actually an act of terrorism? Why do you have to have a connection to some sort of association to be a terrorist?
Well, you don't have to, because that's what self-starters and lone wolves are, which are being encouraged by various groups, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So the issue here is political. The FBI, under this administration, and even a little bit during the Bush administration, has determined that it wants to have better relations with the Muslim community in the United States. And so they bend over backwards not to call things that are obviously terrorist attacks like Fort Hood, for example. It is just insanity, and it is an embarrassment to law enforcement to continue to call Fort Hood workplace violence. This one is clearly a case in which Islam played a role. And it's clear that the guy was angry about being fired, but he was fired because he was proselytizing in the worst workplace, trying to convert fellow workers to Islam. Now, not to call this a terrorist act is silly, and even the local police have gotten into this. I'm not quite sure what's happening in the bloodstream of American law enforcement, but this goody two-shoes stuff has really been helped by the FBI, and it's an embarrassment to the Bureau.
Joe, it seems to me that it actually is insulting to good Muslims, to people who are practicing Islam in a peaceful way. It's insulting to say, well, we don't want to call this terrorism because we don't want to. I would think that good, peaceful, righteous Muslims would be the first one to say, this is horrendous, this is disgusting, we condemn this.
Well, they are, but and they are embarrassed by this. They're of course starting to find their voice. Moderate Muslims are starting to find their voice as they are called out and demand that they speak out. But it's actually more embarrassing to the FBI. They started all of this. The current FBI director, I call him Cardinal Comey, James Comey, a very righteous man in many ways. He certainly views himself that way. He has a history of viewing himself as being a righteous man. The silliness of continuing this joke that these things are not terrorism really becomes, it demeans and degrades the Bureau and makes it look silly in the eyes of ordinary citizens.
All right, so look, we know that in the case of the Ferguson investigation, the Department of Justice dispatched some 40 FBI agents to investigate. In this matter, the local authorities have said, we really don't know if this guy, was a lone wolf or whether he had ties to terrorism. This is outside our wheelhouse. FBI, we need you to come in and look at this question. How many FBI agents do you think will be dispatched to Oklahoma?
Probably just a couple. There probably are FBI agents, obviously, in a field office in Oklahoma already. And so there are people working on it. But this is not going to be a major case for the FBI. The FBI is consumed by political matters now because of the president, the current attorney general, and the FBI director. And what you have is the politicization of law enforcement. Ferguson is the best example. For the president of the United States to go to the United Nations and in a speech about ISIS mention Ferguson in trying to demean the United States as being a country with its own problems.
Yeah, we got our problems too. Look at Ferguson.
Yeah. I must say that the president continues to amaze with the level of his ignorance. I mean, this is clearly an attempt to create moral equivalence between ISIS and Ferguson. And the president, the sad thing is, the president actually believes that. I mean, what you were talking about is someone who has never graduated from a street organizer. He became president of the United States twice, and he still doesn't understand that he's the leader of the free world. This speech at the UN was inane. It had certain good parts to it, but he ruined the whole speech by doing this thing about Ferguson. If you watch him, when he shifts into this street dude thing, it becomes quite remarkable. He's an entirely different person. And it is his true nature. I mean, this is who he is. So at least he's being honest about the nature of what motivates him.
All right, so speaking of Ferguson, he went to the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, and said, I'm not going to comment on what happened in Ferguson. And then he went on to talk about issues that seemed like he was clearly talking about what happened in Ferguson.
Yeah, well, there's no question about that. This is another dissembling by the president. He's
But
very good.
how does that impact the ability of this officer to get a fair shake?
Well, I think the officer has long since been placed in a position of not getting a fair shake in Ferguson because of the media coverage and, of course, the comments by the President of the United States and the Attorney General. Both have placed this investigation in a very, very difficult place. You can see this in the comments about the people in Ferguson not liking the fact that grand juries are secret. They say that the investigation has no transparency. Well, it's not supposed to have transparency.
Yeah,
it's
right.
called a grand jury. And the fact is, this shows a monumental amount of ignorance on the part of that community in Missouri. It also shows an incredible amount of manipulation by black political leaders like Al Sharpton, who is, as we now know, conferring on who the next Attorney General is going to be. Boy, that ought to be a doozy of a process. I hope they're tape recording all of that. That ought to be a treat for historians.
Well, speaking of that, Joe, I wanted to get you on the record about the next Attorney General. I personally think it should be Al Sharpton. Let's just cut to the chase and drop all pretense. But setting aside, we know it's not going to be the second coming of Robert Bork, but what's more interesting to me is the spectacle of potentially a lame duck Harry Reid Senate on its way out, because the Republicans will have won the majority, going through the process of confirming a nominee. Would that be appropriate? Has that been done before?
Well, it doesn't matter. As you know, as long as Democrats are in charge, the rules are always different. They make up the rules as they go along. The media accepts them and says this is the way things have always been. Of course, Harry Reid and the Democrats will confirm a Democratic nominee. They've eliminated the filibuster rule for nominations for all cabinet members and for lower federal judges, both appellate and trial court. So there will be a confirmation of a new Attorney General. It will be pushed through in a lame duck session, assuming that the Republicans take control. I think that's still a 50-50 shot at this point on control of the Senate, especially given Kansas.
Yeah, actually, I'm sorry, we got to stop you there, Joe. We got a tight time thing here.
All right,
I
Joe.
appreciate hearing